Welcome back to my channel. Today I'm going to be making another video that is part of my medical school application series. But this video will be a little bit different because instead of discussing a part of the application process, I'm going to be talking more about the schools you're actually applying to. So I have a lot of students that come to me and they're distraught. They have dreamed of being a doctor for as long as they can imagine, and they tried really, really hard in college. They studied endlessly for the MCAT, and yet either their GPA or their MCAT score makes them not a great candidate for medical school in an MD allopathic medical school. And they come to me and they say, what can I do? Maybe they've already taken an extra gap year and they've reapplied and haven't gotten in, or perhaps they don't want to take another gap year and really just want to get on the process of being a doctor. And they say, is there anything I can do, or do I need to relinquish this dream I've had forever? And the first thing I say is absolutely not. You do not need to give this dream up. There are many options beyond a typical US allopathic medical school. And that's what I'm going to be talking about in this video today. If you're not a great candidate for MD schools in mainland US, are there other options? Are there other places you can apply? Are there other things you can do in order to reach your dreams of becoming a physician? So the first alternative I'm going to talk about are osteopathic medical schools, also known as DO schools. DO schools and MD schools have a lot of similarities. First similarity is that the application process between MD schools and DO schools is virtually identical. You have to take the same college classes in order to actually apply things like organic chemistry and biology. You have to take the dreaded super long MCAT, regardless if you're going to a DO or MD school. And then once you actually get into these medical schools, your training time is exactly the same. Both MD and DO medical schools are both 4 years. And for both, if you want to actually treat patients after graduation, you need to enroll in a residency training program. And in order to enroll in that training program, both schools have similar licensing exams. One is known as the complex, one is known as the USMLE. But at the end of the day, these licensing exams are basically assessing whether or not you're a competent physician. And then finally, another similarity between these two schools is the content taught during the 4 years of the school. And so whether you're in a DO school or an MD school, you're going to have to go through the grueling anatomy process. You're going to have to learn about different organ systems. You're going to be working with doctors in surgical units and on the floor and internal medicine. And so whether you're going to an MD or a DO, you're going to be learning all about the human body. You're going to be learning about how to work with and help patients. So at the end of the day, you're going to emerge from both of these training programs as very competent, very capable physicians. However, that's not to say there aren't differences between these two types of schools. One key difference between DO and MD medical schools is the career path of graduates. A lot, I would say over 50% of DO medical school graduates end up going into a primary care field. This could be being a general practitioner, working in family medicine, perhaps doing psychiatry or pediatrics. Whereas more MD candidates end up specializing in things like interventional cardiology or ophthalmology or radiation oncology. And so if you choose to go to a DO medical school, it doesn't mean you can't specialize. It doesn't mean you one day can't be, a radiologist. But what it does mean is that it's going to be much harder to get into those specialized positions. And you're going to have to really stand out amongst your peers in order to be competitive enough to apply into them. And unlike MD medical schools, DO medical schools also place a pretty heavy emphasis on holistic medicine or whole body medicine. Let me give you an example of what I mean by that. Let's say I am getting horrible migraines and nothing I do is working to stop them. I might go in and see my internal medicine doctor, general practitioner, and say, hey doctor, so-and-so, I've been dealing with these bad migraines. What can I do? If Dr. So-and-so is an MD with an allopathic medical school training, he may approach my problem from a symptom-based perspective. He might say, okay, you're getting migraines, that's your problem. Well, here's a list of medication I can give you. Let's give you Topamax, which is a migraine preventative medication. And he gives me that, he says, take as directed and let me know how you're doing in 4 to 6 weeks or whatever. However, from a more holistic or whole body perspective, a DO practitioner might instead think about symptoms beyond just my migraine pain. They may ask me about my stress levels and offer biofeedback sessions. They may talk about acupuncture. They may even consider changing my diet. And so although MDs can do those things as well, obviously there's nothing stopping them from doing it, osteopathic medical schools tend to place a greater emphasis on considering the whole person instead of just looking at symptoms and thinking about what drugs could best treat those symptoms. And so because of that extra emphasis on holistic medicine and the whole body of a patient, there is an additional component to osteopathic medical school curriculum that sort of incorporates things like alignment of the spine and musculoskeletal, motions and movements and just stuff that's not really addressed as heavily in allopathic medical schools, so that DO medical school students can really learn about the full body and different ways to alleviate symptoms that might not be medication-based or in direct response to those symptoms. Another difference is that there are far more MD programs than there are DO programs in the US. And as a result of this, there are therefore many more MD doctors than there are DO doctors. This doesn't really matter or really change anything, but probably is a difference worth noting. And a final key difference between MD and DO schools is that on average, DO schools are easier to get into than MD schools are. And so if you compare MCAT averages and GPA averages, you'll see that the candidates who are applying and getting into MD schools typically have higher averages in these areas than those who are accepted to and end up attending DO schools. This is certainly not to say that getting into a DO school is easy or simple, because it still requires years and years of preparation and really hard work. But it is worth noting that if your scores aren't at the point needed in order to get into MD granting medical schools, it may be worth considering DO schools given the fact that their admission requirements are slightly lower than that of MD schools. So that's the scoop on MD versus DO schools in the US. Students will come to me and say, I got into these DO schools, I didn't get into MD schools, is my life over? And the answer is absolutely not. In fact, there are students who would prefer to go to DO schools just because they really align with the holistic, whole body idea that really underlies the teaching of osteopathic medicine. However, if that's not your objective and your goal was to get in an MD school, you are still going to have great career options if you go to a DO school. If you succeed in your classes, if you score well on your licensing exams, you are going to have full capability of becoming a practicing physician, working with patients, and saving lives. But let's say you are super set on getting an MD and this whole osteopathic medicine idea doesn't sound like your thing. There is yet another option if your MCAT scores, GPA averages, and extracurriculars aren't enough to get you into an MD granting med school in the US. And that is Caribbean medical schools. Most Caribbean medical schools are MD granting programs, but they are much, much easier to get into than US medical schools. On average, MCAT and GPA scores from Caribbean medical schools are much lower than they are for medical schools in the US. And so this might sound great. Okay, you can get your MD, you can have the goals that you want, everything's good, the Caribbean's wonderful, there's sun, and it's lovely. Why don't people just go there? And it's not that simple. So there's been a lot of talk in the news in the last few years about our Caribbean medical school scams. What is going on? Why are these doctors going there? What is happening? And I hope that now I can kind of clarify a little bit about what all that talk has been about. There are about 50 to 60 Caribbean medical schools, and honestly, there's more every year. And some of the medical schools in the Caribbean are pretty decent medical schools. When they publish their match list, the results are pretty impressive. Students graduate from those schools and go on to live very, very successful lives. However, there's a huge disparity in quality between Caribbean medical schools. So some of them, like St. George and Ross, for example, have been around for a while, have a great reputation, and really set their students up for success. But there are a whole host of other medical schools in the Caribbean that do just the opposite. They're for-profit universities that are essentially getting money from US medical students who weren't able to get into other schools and not really even training them very well. A lot of these don't even have the accreditation necessary to let students clinically rotate in the US. And so the key with Caribbean medical schools is making sure you are very, very careful that what you are paying for is actually worth it. If the medical school you hope to go to in the Caribbean that's going to solve all your problems and guarantee you a future as an MD really has low graduation rates and student debt is out the roof and no one is happy and no one even returns your calls, that is a huge, huge red flag. So much investigation is needed when going to Caribbean medical schools to make sure that you are not just throwing your money out the window for a school that's going to do nothing for your future success. Some of the low-quality medical schools in the Caribbean admit more students than they know they can take on because they anticipate that a lot of students will drop out in their first 2 years, whether because they're forced to due to low grades or because they just can't handle the burden of having to try so hard to keep their spot. And so it's super important that you read not only the glowing reviews on that school's website, but do your due diligence. Make sure that you are researching the opportunities that your school can provide. There are a few things I recommend you making sure that your Caribbean med school offers. The first is clinical rotations in the United States. You should certainly not be going to any Caribbean medical school that does not guarantee that you can clinically rotate in the United States. Some of these top Caribbean medical schools have deals made with other US med schools where you can rotate for your surgery rotation and, Louisiana State Hospital, I don't know. But the point is, do not go to medical schools in the Caribbean that don't enable you to rotate in the US because your degree will be essentially worthless. Also, ensure that your medical school is accredited. Without proper accreditation, you cannot match into US residency programs. And at that point, what is even the purpose? Another factor to consider when applying to Caribbean medical schools is the price. A lot of these schools are for-profit universities that can really price gouge you just because they're taking susceptible young students dreaming of being a doctor, willing to pay whatever price is necessary to get there. If the prices are absolutely outlandish and what they're offering doesn't seem that great, I would back away as quickly as you possibly can. Another test of the quality of Caribbean medical schools is whether or not you as a student would be eligible for federal funding. The most accredited and well-known Caribbean medical schools are approved by the U.S. Department of Education for Title IV funding. This essentially means you can get federal aid if you end up going there. However, there are plenty of medical schools in the Caribbean that don't enable this. You can't get federal aid if you go there, which is essentially saying that the U.S. Department of Education doesn't think it's a worthy medical school. Again, as with the other things, step away if that's not there. And then the final thing to think about with respect to Caribbean medical schools are what are your future chances of actually getting into residency? What are your odds of having the future you dream of? And to be quite honest, it is harder to get into US residencies if you went to a Caribbean medical school, as opposed to if you went to an MD or DO medical school in the US. And this can be really frustrating. Let's say you have dreamed of being a doctor your whole life. You have then applied to schools, didn't get in, maybe applied again, and finally got into a Caribbean medical school. You then took on mountains and mountains of debt just to be able to get this degree. And now you have this degree, but yet no one is letting you into their residency programs. You are just getting shot down when you try to apply to different residency positions. And so it's important to look at the match list. It's important to see where past graduates of those schools have gone to. Because as appealing as an MD might sound, if you can't actually go anywhere with it, get jobs, go to residency programs, it's not worth very much at all. And so when I talk to students about this topic, students who struggle to get into MD medical schools in the US, I give them both the DO option and I give them the Caribbean option. In my personal opinion, the DO option is superior because your odds of getting into residency are still very high, and there is a lot of potential options for success. That's not to say everyone who goes to Caribbean medical schools will not succeed. There are definitely success stories of people who have gone on to lead very successful and very prestigious lives in the field of medicine. However, just realize that you're going to be fighting an upward battle. You are going to be trying really hard, and you're going to have to prove yourself time and time again that the school you went to has prepared you for the next stage of your training. And so before signing your name on some kind of student loan, make sure you do your research on these options and think about what makes the most sense for you. I definitely think that if you dream to become a physician, you should not just abandon that dream if your MCAT and GPA don't enable you to get into a US MD granting medical school. There are other options, which I've outlined in this video. So then it's a matter of thinking about which of those options is best for you. And so if you have any questions about this, if you're in a bind and are just feeling really stressed about where to turn, please either comment below or send me an email. My email is listed in the description box below, and I'd be more than happy to help you out. Please like this video and subscribe to my channel so you can stay up to date when I release new tips and tricks for the medical school application process. Thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.